Welcome to the Career Connections podcast, where recruiting leader Stephanie Alston and operations leader Amie Thompson share real-world insights to help you navigate the job market, build confidence, and find the right career fit. Let's get into today's episode.
All right. Well, welcome to today's episode. We are so excited to be back with you all for another amazing episode on all things related to this crazy job market. I am Stephanie Alston, and I am the CEO of BGG Enterprises, where we connect executive job seekers to companies who are seeking to hire or outsource more executive roles. And I have my great friend Amie Thompson also joining us today for another episode, and I'll let her introduce herself to you all.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I'm Amie Thompson. I go by the Introverted Entrepreneur, and I wear a few different hats. I enjoy helping people focus on success, both in the workplace, in business, if you are also an entrepreneur, and in leadership. I focus primarily on other introverts. Obviously, my advice is for everyone, but I do like to help other introverts get more confident in building their brands and being successful both in corporate life and business life.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So today's episode is all about resumes, and I just wanted to share some very interesting data that I've collected over the last several days as it relates to resumes that I'm sure will probably be a little startling to you, but I wanted to give you all a little context before I jump into this conversation with Amie, who is the expert on all things resumes. I don't enjoy resumes. I read them, but they're not my favorite thing to talk about. So a couple things. In fact, you all will be very surprised by this stat. I have read that over 75% of resumes never reach a human because of the applicant tracking system, which in short is ATS. And that tells us why formatting and keywords matter. Something else I learned is that right now, every single job is getting about 250 plus applicants. However, only 4 to 6 candidates are actually getting interviews. And then lastly, and I think about Amie because Amie actually lives by this, is that the average recruiter or HR professional spends between 6 to 8 seconds on a single resume at any given time. So with that being said, I just want you all to know that resumes are definitely a full-time job. You have to be committed to tweaking it and doing whatever is necessary for the open roles that you are looking for. So Amie, we all know that resumes often lead to frustration because people don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for job seekers who have been laid off or are fearful of their jobs being let go, or perhaps they just want to get back into the market? What advice do you have for them if they're staring at a blank canvas trying to figure out where to start with these things?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I think a couple of things come to mind. One is keep it simple. Definitely keep it simple. Your resume doesn't have to be a book about everything you've ever done in your career, right? Your resume should just be like a door opener. So it's like almost like a business card in a way that you're giving to somebody so that they get a glimpse of who you are and they get an indication that you are a fit for the position that they're looking to fill. So first is keep it simple and don't feel like you have to tell every single thing about yourself. The second thing is, and it seems obvious to me, but maybe not obvious to other people, when companies put together these job descriptions, they are literally laying out for you every answer to any question that should be answered on your resume. What I mean by that, it's almost like you're taking a quiz and they're giving you the answers ahead of time. They're telling you about the company. They're telling you what the responsibilities are. They're telling you the characteristics that they're looking for. Your resume should then reflect that. Your cover letter should reflect that if you do a cover letter. So back to keeping it simple, don't overthink it. Don't try to impress them with all of the things you can do. Just focus on what they're asking you to do, what they're asking you to focus on, and then make sure that's clear on your resume. So I think that it is time consuming. I don't think that you can put your resume together in 5 seconds. It is time consuming, but it should be really tailored to the position that you're applying for. And just remember that the hiring manager, the HR team, they are giving you the information that you should have on your resume. It's right there on the job description. Just take their word for it that that's what they're looking for, and then fill in your experience and your background as it relates to that.
Okay, so Amie, you said keep it simple, right? But what if I have 30 years of experience and I want you to see all 25 jobs that I've had? How do I keep it simple when I've had so many jobs?
Great question. And I think it's about you because your resume shouldn't be a list of jobs. Your resume should, as best as you can, try to tell a story. So,
Mm,
in that 30 years, in your 25 different jobs, it is very unlikely that each job is completely unique, right? So, there's got to be some commonality. Maybe in 10 of those jobs, you were a supervisor and you had teams that you managed. So, then a section of your resume should be about your experience managing and leading teams. You don't have to list out every job you've done that for, but that is a skill set that you have. Maybe in another 5 of those jobs, maybe you did project management, maybe you did sales, right? So you want to find what are those themes, what are those categories maybe that you have that are common throughout the jobs that you've had, because as a person who might look at a resume, I mean, honestly, I rarely make it to the second page. So if your resume is longer than 2 pages, I won't even see it anyway. So it's like, tell me who you are and what you're capable of doing. I actually don't care as much who you did it for. You could have worked, some jobs you might see, they want you to have worked for a big consulting firm. That's great. But if you didn't do anything there, then I don't care that you worked for them, right? Maybe you work for a small mom and pop company, but you led something or you helped drive revenue. That's more important to me if that's what I'm looking for. So, yes, keep it simple. And no matter if you've got 2 years of experience or you have 20 years of experience, you should be able to categorize the work that you've done and the value that you've added.
So, even in keeping it simple, right? Are there things that you have identified in the past on folks' resume that have stood out to you and made you want to keep reading? Like, was there a bigger font? Was there a certain title? Like, what things can a person do to maybe stand out just a little bit more visually on their resume, or does it not matter for you?
Yeah. So for me, a couple of things are around not so much formatting, but font size is important. Can I read it? Right. I think your bullets to me are important. One thing to keep in mind though, if your resume is getting reviewed by a human and you just shared a stat that said it's usually not, but if it's being read by a human, everyone is different. And that's the challenge. I might look at something and it catches my eye. Somebody else, it might not. But for me, I hate long bullets. So if you're going to use a bullet, make it punchy, get to the point. I don't like overly wordy things. Again, it's get to the point. Tell me what you want to tell me in as few words as possible because I'm scanning, I'm not reading. Right.
Right.
So if I have a job that I've posted and we've gotten 1,500 resumes, do you really think, my team is going to read every resume? No, but we'll scan most of them. And so in scanning, you have to think about, I'm not reading a full sentence, I'm looking at words here and there. And so when you keep things simple, you keep it short, you keep it concise, it's going to be easier for me to digest more information than if you have something really, really long, because I'm not going to read through it.
Right. So you mentioned scanning the resume, right? And so
Mhm.
I sound like I'm old. Like I'm gonna say I come from the day. I come from a time where we were told, quantifiable results are really important on your resume. However, I recently read online that maybe quantifiable results are not a good thing because I may say, hey, as a recruiter, I have increased, hiring by 100%, but I only hired one person, right? So for you as someone who's reading over resumes, how important are those percentages when you see them? Or do maybe they don't carry that much weight anymore until you actually get into the interview process and get to know that person?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I will say, and we've talked about this before, your resume is kind of that opportunity for you to get seen and hopefully get a conversation. So don't put anything on your resume that could be misleading. So
Mm,
in that example, if you're selected for an interview and we have a conversation, I'm like, oh, wow, you increased by 100%. And then you tell me that it's one person. Think about how that's going to make you look, right? So when you're putting those stats on the resume, you need to make sure that you can back it up with good information if you're asked. I do think stats are important more for any type of sales related position. I think sometimes an HR position. So certain positions or certain functional areas, it would be much more important. For example, if I were to review a sales resume and there are no numbers, there are no targets, there are no KPIs, there's nothing numerical on it, I'm probably going to ignore it. Because if you work in a sales environment and you weren't held to any kind of quota or any kind of number, then you probably weren't doing a great job,
Right.
or the company wasn't really the type of structure that we might need. So I think certain functional areas would, those things would jump out, those kind of stats and those metrics. So anywhere that you can do that, I think is good. And to be truthful, as long as you can back it up, you'll be in good shape. Nobody's going to call for a reference and say, did they really increase revenue by 22%? Like nobody's going to do that. So as long as you can back it up with an example, you should be fine to put some stats on there, even if it's a guesstimate. You know what I mean? You'd be okay if you can back it up.
Yeah. So a lot of our viewers and listeners are at the executive level, right? And so I'll be curious to know, how do you feel candidates should represent any job gaps on their resumes, right? So
Mhm.
should they be honest and put, unemployed for this amount of time, or do they wait for the conversation and explain those gaps? What are your thoughts on resume gaps on resumes?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it depends on how long the gap is, would be my perspective. So if you've people aren't stupid. They understand the market. They understand people get laid off, especially if you're a higher paid individual. So having a few months where you're not working, not really that big of a deal. If you have a longer gap, a year or 2 years, I think the question would come up in an interview of what was going on during that time or why did you have such a gap. I would probably encourage people to include something on the resume because that could be a turnoff. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with people,
Yeah.
looking at your resume, you are dealing with bias. And what you don't want to do is give anybody an opportunity to discount you without you having a chance to explain. So put that context either in your cover letter or on the resume. But I don't think gaps in employment is as big of a deal as it used to be because of how the markets have been most recently. It would be unlikely to find someone who's never been unemployed, who's never been laid off, that type of thing. So I
Yeah.
think it's okay as long as you can discuss the reasons why.
Yeah, and I think that's really great to even hear you say that, because I've come in contact with a lot of executives where there's a big gap between 2020 and 2025, but we also
Mhm.
know COVID happened in
Right.
2020. And then there was a long period of time where many folks were unemployed, say 2020, 2021. And so even if the market opened back up fully, say in 2022, we know so many shifts have happened between
That's right.
22 and now 25. And so even if, let's say you mentioned them representing it on their resume, how have you seen folks put that on their resume? Is it, I freelance during this time? Is it contract? Like,
Yeah.
what does that look like?
I would absolutely put any kind of freelance work or any contract work on there so that the dates kind of line up. The other thing, for example, that I don't do on my resume is actually put months, right? So I put years. So that way, if you have a 3 to 4 month gap in a certain year, it's not really apparent because
Right.
you're only putting the years on the resume. But yeah, I think that, advice that I would give anybody at that more senior level is have something on the side. So even if you have one client that you work with, then that's information that you can add to your resume to fill in those gaps, and also help you earn income while you're waiting on your next opportunity. But yeah, I think having it on the resume, because again, you cannot control what assumptions people make when they're looking at your resume, and they're not going to tell you. Nobody's going to look at your resume and say, oh, I don't like these gaps. Let me call this person and tell them that, right? They're just going to throw your resume to the side and move on to the next person. So you want to try to make sure that you're not leaving room for a lot of assumptions.
Right. No, I love that. And for those who are listening or who are watching, are a couple of resources out there available if you are looking to freelance in between time. And we can get into that during another episode. But just a couple of those include websites like Upwork, or reaching
Mhm.
out to companies like mine, who do offer sometimes contract and freelance opportunities. That's
Yeah.
also a great resource as well. But don't fall under the assumption that just because it's not a full-time permanent role that it can't go on your resume. It
Yeah.
absolutely can. And to Amy's point, it does help eliminate some of those big gaps that many executives are being faced with. Consulting and freelancing definitely counts. So I want
Yeah.
to slightly shift gears, but not really. Again, this could probably be a whole other episode. But one thing that I have found is that a lot of job candidates are applying for roles. They have their resume, but there's not alignment on their LinkedIn. So let's say
Mhm.
on LinkedIn, you put that you worked at a company from 2022 to 2025, but then on your resume, it says 2023 to 2024. How important for you as someone who reviews resume is it for them to have their LinkedIn also aligned to their resume?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would say it is important to have them aligned, but not necessarily for the, opportunity to get an interview. I would say it's more important for the job seeker because if you go into an interview and you mention anything, year, title, or something like that, and someone's looking at your resume and it's not what you're saying because you're saying what's on your LinkedIn, I think that can just cause more confusion. But as like an HR person or a hiring manager, it's actually unlikely that I'll look at LinkedIn and resume at the same time. So normally, if I've posted something on LinkedIn, I'm using LinkedIn only for
Right.
looking at people's skill sets and their experience, and then narrowing it down to the candidates that I'm interested in passing over to the hiring manager. And then I would share the resumes at that time. But to be truthful, for me, again, this is a very subjective thing. But
Right.
for
Yeah.
me, LinkedIn has so many functions and features that I can do with filtering the applicants that is just much easier to weed out people who aren't qualified. Having said that, some people don't keep their LinkedIn updated like they would a resume. Not my problem, right? Like, not my problem. So, when I'm looking for people, if the application is through LinkedIn, I'm using the information that you have on LinkedIn. So, even if your resume says certain skills or certain experiences, I may not even see that, or somebody on my team may not see that because I would usually instruct my team, go through LinkedIn, look at these skills. We had 10 listed that we're looking for. They've got 6, not interested. We're looking for 7 and up, right? There's just so many things that you can filter and making it easier. So the alignment, I think, is more important for the job seeker, less important for the person that's reviewing it, but I think it's important.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so you mentioned how much you value LinkedIn. Do
Yeah.
you personally see in the future seeing LinkedIn replacing the traditional resume?
I don't know. It's a really great discussion topic because the resume feels so old school. It feels like, why do we continue to do this? But every single job you apply for asks you to submit your resume. But if you're applying on LinkedIn, your LinkedIn information is right there. So it's like, is it really necessary? So I think it's a really great question. But I would say, if I'm interviewing somebody, it's more likely that I will have printed out their resume to have that with me during the interview than have their LinkedIn pulled up. But if I'm looking for who we want to interview, it's more likely I'm going to look at the LinkedIn, which is, I don't know if it makes sense or anything, but it's like that's the way my mind works. And
Right,
so I don't know. I think it's one of those necessary evils. We might have both for quite a while.
right. Yeah. So this may be more subjective, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So as you know, some ATS systems are integrated with LinkedIn, so it
Yeah.
gives you the option to either manually apply or to import your LinkedIn. Do you have a preference that you share with job seekers is better over the other?
I don't. I think it's because I think if a person or if a company is using an ATS system, if they haven't given you a preference, like some companies are very clear, this is the only way you should apply. If you apply on LinkedIn, if you apply somewhere else, we're not looking at it. And
Right,
so it's like, I think they usually would give an indication if they have a preference. But I think in general, most HR teams, they're going to take what comes in. And so if they're giving people an opportunity to apply different ways, they're going to accept those. And I don't think there's going to be any preference like, oh, because this came in through the ATS, we're going to look at that closer or anything like that. I don't believe that, but it's early on. It's early on. I know what we had talked about a little bit before is like, because LinkedIn is getting so sophisticated, some people are actually moving away from other ATS systems and
right.
just using LinkedIn because it is pretty powerful of what you can do in there. So that's something to watch out for. But right now, at least for the next 12 months, I feel like it's both. You're gonna just you're going
Yeah.
to use both the resume and LinkedIn, and you're going to have some flexibility on how to apply. But I think the companies aren't going to give any preferential treatment.
Right. Yeah. So can you walk me through? So you've talked a lot about resumes. Could you walk me through maybe some of the don'ts that you don't like on people's resumes and maybe why they should stay away from certain things?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things that come to mind is thinking. Here's I'll start with the do and then come back to the don'ts. But
Okay.
I think from a do perspective, try your best to put yourself and your mind in the shoe of the person that's reading it. Right. So one of the things, and I've run an agency before and we did a lot of websites, and it would be the same story. Your
Yeah.
website is not about you. It's about the person that's visiting your site. Your resume is actually not about you. It's about me if I'm looking to hire somebody. So your resume should be written in a way that makes me feel like I want to meet this person. So that means it's not a laundry list of everything you've ever done, because I might not care about that if it doesn't relate to the position that I'm looking to fill. If you, let's say I work at a company that's in technology and you have a lot of experience that's not relevant, but it's experience that you have, I don't care. I mean, the truth of the matter is I don't care. So the do part of it is try to think like a hiring manager, think like an HR person when you're writing your resume. What is going to be important to the person who's reading it? I
Right.
think as far as like some specific things, being wordy is something that I always try to have people avoid. You made a stat, or you said a stat at the beginning. I usually like to say people spend less than 10 seconds, but I think you said 6 to 8
Yeah.
seconds, right? And on the surface, you might not think that's very long, but if you stop talking for 8 seconds, it's a really long, like you can get through a lot of stuff in
Yeah.
8 seconds. And so make those seconds count. So when you're going through your resume, do an audit of your own resume. Read it as if you're an HR person, as if you're a hiring manager, and see what stands out. Does it just sound super monotonous? Does it sound boring? Does it actually sound like you added any valuable to all of these companies that you've worked for? And so really it's about, to me, less about super, super specific things and more about high level.
Right.
Look at your resume as if you were a hiring manager and then review it and make sure it sounds like somebody you would want to talk to. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Does your resume sound like somebody you would want to talk to if you were hiring? And unfortunately, in most cases, I would say people would say no. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's like because people don't take the time to really review their own resumes.
Yeah. So you just mentioned, how does your resume sound? So when we're talking about sound, I would love to kind of hear your thoughts. And again, this is a whole nother conversation for another podcast episode. But there's so much as it relates to the evolution of resumes, right?
Yeah.
How does AI impact your resume review, right? Because
Yeah.
we live in this world of Chat GPT, and if you utilize AI enough, there are certain words that come up time and time, and even oh no,
Okay, hold on. I don't know what just happened.
it's still
You
recording.
there?
It's still recording.
Okay, it's still recording, but it switched us,
Did it?
or well, my screen. So now I'm on the opposite side, but you completely went out on my side.
You went on my side.
That is so weird. So I don't know what is going on. Okay, so start over with like completely. I didn't hear where you were going into.
Okay, okay, okay. I
You
said,
said sound of, but that's all I heard.
give me 1 second. Okay, so you talked about the importance of how a resume sounds when you're reading it, right? And so
Mhm.
I would love to kind of hear your thoughts when we talk about sound. There's been this whole evolution of resumes, right? And technology, and we now see people utilizing AI for their resumes, right? But
Mhm.
if you utilize platforms like ChatGPT, like you and I do, for so many different things, there are certain words that we know are very much AI generated, right? There are
Yeah.
certain punctuation marks, which are the dashes. We see them everywhere. Then we automatically think, oh, maybe that's also AI. I say all that
Yeah.
to say, what role does that play when you're reviewing resumes? Do you ever find a time where you're reviewing and you're just like, wait a second, a human didn't write this?
Yeah, I think I'm probably not as good at detecting that as some people are, but I will say some tricks that I have learned in using the AI tools. Number one, and I would encourage people, if you do any kind of writing in your job or what you're looking for, but particularly in a job search, you would probably benefit from doing like a prompt engineering course. And there are lots of them out there. But a couple of the things I will say, one is when you're using an AI tool, you can give it a role, right? So I have put my resume in there because you can attach it just like in a PDF form. And it's like, here's the hiring manager or here's the CEO for this company that I'm applying for. Look through their LinkedIn, look through anything else you find online, and then give me your perspective of how this person would view my resume.
Hmm.
And then the AI tool will come back and say, well, your resume is strong, but this person tends to write a lot of articles on this. You might want to add that into your resume. So it'll give you some tips to help personalize it, not necessarily write it for you. I mean, you can do that, but it's more helpful in my opinion, just so you can get some perspective on, are you touching on the right things? If you're interviewing for a certain, or you're not, excuse me, not interviewing, you're applying for a certain type of job. So let's say you have a project management job that you're applying for. Then you can say to ChatGPT, can you act as a senior level project manager and then read my resume and tell me what's missing? What are some things that I should have on there? And so using the AI tools to help you with a different perspective, I think is really, really helpful. The last thing I'll say is there are plenty of AI detectors and like plagiarism platforms that you can put your resume into and see that it's 20% likely to be AI written, or 5% or 80%. Those are helpful as well. I think they're probably on the HR side, fewer people who can detect that stuff like manually just by eyeballing it, but you never know who puts stuff in the system to find out what's AI generated. But you do want to be careful. The last thing I'll say is, in something like a chat GPT, you can also tell it, I need anything that's being written to be written from a human. So I
Right.
want you to make sure that you don't use long sentences. You, like, some things are a little bit obvious. The M dash, oh my gosh, is a key thing for AI tools. It's like, so be careful about using that. The this or that is also a common thing that AI does, because this, then that. So in describing, like in your cover letter, things like that. So there are some common things, and you could even ask ChatGPT, what are the 10 common things that give away that something was AI written?
That's
And then
good.
it'll probably give you a list. And then you can look at that. But that is something that I would probably bet a little bit of money, if I was a gambler, that most HR folks and most ATSs are not detecting AI usage in resumes and cover letters. But I think that it's good practice, because you don't know what's going to happen in a few months. So it's good practice to try to make sure that your content is always appears to be written by a human.
Right. Well, I just want to share this because this is like a little fun fact. I
Mhm.
recently ran something that I wrote in high school through Chat GPT because I just wanted to see how it would perceive if it was written by a human or
Yeah.
not. It actually ranked 100% for AI. And so I asked, like, am I a robot? Because this is crazy.
That is wild.
Sometimes it can be wrong, and it could
Correct.
also be because we utilize AI as a society so much that it has now learned to sound more and more like a
Yeah.
human. And
Which
so,
is good.
which is good,
Yeah.
but it also could be a bad thing if a company is relying very heavily on these, AI plagiarism tools.
Yeah.
I just thought that was kind of funny.
That is interesting. And I will say, if you use these plagiarism tools, I do use like 3 or 4 of them, because you will get different
Right.
information from each of them. So you kind of have to use your good judgment, but there are some tools out there that can help. But
Yeah.
it's a good question, because I think that that kind of AI generator detection is important, but I just don't know if it's gotten to the resume yet of level of importance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually love the piece of advice that you shared as it relates to taking those prompt engineering courses, because I
Yeah.
had never thought about, hey, review my resume as if you were the hiring manager for this role.
Yes.
That is actually a really great tip, because I know AI is pretty accurate because they're going to do their research
That's
on
right.
said person with that role. And they're going to make sure that you personalize that resume in a way that will essentially win them over. It's
That's
almost like reverse psychology a little bit.
Yeah.
So pretty cool. I
Yeah.
really love that piece of advice. Going
And
down,
one other thing on that, though, is like when we talked about cover letter, I think on our previous episode, and it's like, how important is it? But it comes back to, I have no idea how people can apply for 50 things a day. You should be researching the company. You should know who probably would see your resume if a human does see it. So maybe it's the HR person, maybe it's the actual hiring manager, and you should be able to find that person and then understand what some of their kind of favorite things to talk about are, so that you can tailor that cover letter to that person. Even if that person never sees it, there is something to be said as an HR person when you're reading it and it sounds personal. It doesn't sound like this is the same cover letter they use for 50 jobs. It really actually sounds like they took time to write it, because that is a characteristic that most people want in employees, is
right,
that research and taking the time to tailor something. So even that little bit can give you a leg up.
right, yeah. So there, in addition to ChatGPT, there's another tool that I've been using and encouraging other folks to use called resume.co.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it's very cheap, actually. I actually think they do a free trial if anyone out there is interested in it. But it literally can take your current resume, you put in your job description, and it'll do its best to try to tailor your resume
Yep.
specifically to that role that you apply for and try to utilize those keywords that you're looking for. But in addition to both ChatGPT and resumes.co, are there other resources that come to mind, Amie, for you that you would encourage job seekers to use if they are trying to polish up their resume?
Yeah, so I would say, those are probably the main ones. I shouldn't say main ones, the ones that I have experience using. There are plenty of tools out there. One of the things I do want to say is, anytime we talk about AI, and I know you'll agree with me on this, it's a tool, right? It's to help you write something better, to help you do something better. It's not to replace what you're doing. And so a lot of times, in even like the tools that help to match the resume a little bit, make sure you've done that work, right? Because those tools are going to take your resume and maybe make an assumption and write something in there. Make sure you're scrutinizing it and that you could explain it if you were to be interviewed. But I think that I know Perplexity is another tool that's like a little bit similar to what ChatGPT does. I don't use it as much, but that's another tool where the asking the question is the most important thing, in my opinion, when you're looking at tools. So really, how do you ask the question? How do you give the AI tool the necessary prompt to give you back the output that you need? So if you are looking, that resume tool that you mentioned is specifically for that purpose. But if you're
Right.
using a more generic AI tool, then what kind of story are you telling it? What are you giving them about you to make sure they can tailor it to the job description? So it's all also about what you give it, what you give the tool, as far as what it can give back to you to help you.
Okay, no, that is great. So, Amie, I think we're going to end here, but I want to end with one final piece of advice
Yep.
that you have for job seekers who are looking to improve their resumes. What's one thing you would like for them to leave with today?
I would say, I hate to repeat myself, but I do think keeping it simple is really important. And what I mean by that is keeping it simple doesn't mean don't spend a lot of time doing something, right? You could still spend time and effort into it, but keeping it simple. But keep it simple so that the person who's reading it is clear on who you are, what you do, and the value that you can bring. I'm going to give two pieces of advice. So one is keep it simple. Two, though, is I haven't talked about this a lot, but I think value is really important. You don't want someone to look at your resume and think, a lot of times people confuse productivity with value. So they list out all these things that they've done, and it's like, but who cares? Like, did you help drive revenue? Did you save costs? Did you hire people? Did you help customers get their projects done? Like, what did you do to add value to the organization? And I think that is a place where sometimes people can get hung up. They like to list out everything that they've done or everything that they were responsible for, but those things don't matter as much as if you didn't actually add value to the business. So I would say keep it simple as much as you can, keep it clear and simple, but think about value and how can your resume tell the story of the value that you bring to a company.
Right. That is amazing. Thank you so much for that. And I just
Yeah.
want to end with this one very positive note to just say that the market is tough out here, but just know that it's not always you, it's not always your resume. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's just the market. Just
Yep.
continue to stay strong, keep applying, and if all else fails, come back to this episode and revisit it and just know
Mhm.
that we've laid out some really solid tips for you to help improve your resume. But until next time, join us again for another exciting episode as we talk about all things job market and resumes.
Yep. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Career Connections podcast with Stephanie and Amie. Connect with us on LinkedIn for more career tips, resources, and conversations that help you grow with confidence.